Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video is quite simple, quite straightforward. Today I'm going to be chatting through 7 of my all-time favorite books. Obviously, I do a lot of reading and I read rather broadly across a lot of different genres, so I really like to do just some roundups every once in a while of 7 books I truly love so much, and especially like with more time that passes, the more I feel like the books have burrowed a bit further into my heart. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. First book I want to talk about is Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. I cannot emphasize how much this book took me by surprise, and also just how impressed I am with how much the author was able to pack in to a pretty dang short book. But I loved everything about the reading experience of this. Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher is a dark, kind of modern-esque fairy tale. We follow our main character who sets out on a quest to try to save her sister, who is trapped in a very dangerous marriage with her husband. The book itself opens on our main character Mara attempting to complete some very strange and appearingly impossible tasks set upon her by a bone witch, who basically says if she completes these, she will agree to help her. Shockingly, Mara does complete these tasks, which includes building a dog out of bones, and now this bone witch basically joins Mara on a quest to try to save her sister. Along the way, Mara collects additional kind of wayward individuals to join her on her journey. This book is dark and strange and beautiful. It's structured exactly like a fairy tale. There's so many lessons and strange settings. It's also incredibly whimsical, and I love when whimsy is used within like an adult fantasy setting. I feel like it's often left in middle grade, and I feel like it should not be. This book was so creative. We have a fairy godmother, we have a demonic chicken, have a knight sort of lost to the sands of time. So many amazing characters and a really intriguing plot line. I just fell into this book head first, and I loved every single second of it. I flew through it. Just one of the best like fairy tale-esque stories I've read in years. Next up, I have to mention Robin Hobb, and more particularly the Live Ship Trader series by Robin Hobb. I feel like it's been a few months since I've talked about Robin Hobb on my channel, which I felt like I needed to fix. Obviously, because she is one of my favorite authors of all time. This particular universe that she has created is by far one of my favorite fantasy experiences of all time. And the Live Ship Traders trilogy specifically is one of my favorite series inside of the whole Robin Hobb universe, if you will. That was a pretty long setup, but let's talk more specifically about this book. The interesting thing about the Live Ship Traders trilogy is that you can technically start here. The Robin Hobb universe kind of has 2 starting points. The first is the Farseer trilogy, which is the very first series of all of her books, but you can technically also start here as long as you go backwards to the Farseer trilogy before continuing onward. And I love this book, and what really surprised me about this is I think the setup of it really kind of surprised me, because I usually don't like pirates and seafaring tales, but I fell head over heels in love with this series. The characters, the plot lines, it was so emotional and intense and engaging. But if you're not familiar, the Live Ship Trader series is a multi-POV tale set in a few locations, but predominantly an area called Bingtown. Bingtown is kind of like a trading hub, and trade culture is very central to the society here. In large part, as to why this area is so good at trading is that they have access to something called live ships, which are exactly as it sounds, ships that are in fact alive, and they have their own personalities and opinions and all of these things. This again houses so many characters, a lot of them center around one specific family, and also has a large cast of female characters which have different destinies, opinions, perspective, ages, which I think is a large reason why I love this series so much. We follow characters kind of heading out trying to seize their own destiny. We follow characters trying to gain as much power as possible. We follow characters trying to keep their family afloat. We follow characters who are pirates and who are the most evil and despicable people you could ever come across. It's so dynamic. It's absolutely fascinating, and just this entire trilogy, the build of it, not only in the character development, but the plot itself is just perfect. I love the Live Ship Trader series, and I also feel like if you don't even read a lot of fantasy, this will still appeal to you, because I feel like the emotional stakes and the character work present in all of Robin Hobb's books just bring them to a whole different level. You know what I mean? Speaking of a multi-POV book that will absolutely destroy your emotions, I also have Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead. I read this last year and it absolutely rocked my world. Like, once I finished this book, I realized this was a book I would, one, be recommending for people to read for the rest of their lives, and just one I feel like I will be constantly thinking about. Like, I sobbed reading this book, but I was also so angry the entire time. Reading this book is like whiplash. It's a whole experience in and itself. But Great Circle by Maggie Shipstead is kind of a dual timeline story. The first character we follow is named Marion, and we find her in the turn of the century in a small town in Montana. Here, Marion kind of grows up a little bit wild with her twin brother, and Marion also dreams of becoming a pilot. And she has a steadfast intensity about her in this pursuit, and she will not give up her desire to be a pilot for anyone, and she will stop at nothing to get it. Fast forward to sort of present day, we follow a young Hollywood Scarlett who's kind of dealing with a scandal, and she gets the opportunity to play Marion in a movie kind of documenting her life. The fascinating thing about this book is it basically toys with perspective, with legacy, what people take from your legacy to kind of create a narrative that better suits them. Watch as the actress Hadley becomes more enmeshed in Marion's life and sort of becomes just as obsessed with her as we are, and their parallel storylines to intermix, and you also get to see the different complexities of being a woman at the turn of the century and in modern day, how things have changed, how they haven't at all. But all of this is just absolutely anchored by the tale of Marion herself and Marion's family. It is so intense. I thought picking this book up, it was going to be dreamlike and maybe romantic and beautiful. This book is like a punch in the gut. Marion is intense and this book is intense. I also really appreciate that the author made such a cutting story because Marion deserves nothing less, if that makes sense. You also have a great cast of side characters that are just as fascinating and emotional as Marion herself, particularly the storylines of Marion's brother. I could just go on for days about how amazing this book is, just from the historical setting to the complexity and the different things that the story itself explores. It's just amazing and I loved it. I feel like this is a book I will reread countless times throughout my life, and I feel like I'll get like different things from it every time I do so, especially as I myself like get older, if you know what I mean. So anyway, this book was amazing, and if you're looking for like a literary fiction book, this is a great one to pick up. There's something about people being incredibly passionate to no ends about a very specific thing, like for example aviation, that I always really enjoy in any type of media I consume, from documentaries to books. I just really enjoy kind of like the impassioned genius trope, and this definitely also kind of has elements of that. The next series I have to talk about is the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey. I felt the need to include this because I feel like when I reflect back on a lot of the books I've read over the past few years, the Expanse series always pops up in my brain as just simply one of the most entertaining pickups I've had recently. The Expanse series has always pulled me out of any type of reading slump, any type of slowdown I have felt in my reading. Just the plot, the pacing, the characters, the setting is just so explosive and so entertaining and fun. I just really, really, really love it. And as like a space opera tale, I think it's perfect and just delivering exactly what you would want from it, and also kind of what it's trying to deliver, which I think is key. But the Expanse series is a very long, as I mentioned, space opera tale. It's set, as I mentioned, in outer space in kind of like a near future reality where humanity has expanded beyond the reaches of Earth. And we have now moved to places like Mars and the Moon, which has their own governments and their own interests, and also to a series of space stations called the Belt. All of these areas all kind of despise each other. There's lots of political tension between all of them. Beginning of book one, though, we follow one of our main characters, Jim, who's a ship captain, kind of stumble upon a piece of technology that upends everything and kind of sets the spark to the explosion that kind of overtakes the entire system itself. And so begins just an absolutely breakneck speed of a series. To think how much the plot has ballooned over the first 5 books I've read is absolutely bananas. I honestly do not understand how the authors of this series can constantly think of new ways to like one-up themselves in keeping the plot not only fresh but exciting. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we're constantly being introduced to new characters, tackling all of the complex politics from different perspectives and directions. The series also utilizes like macro and micro specific issues. So each book kind of has like an isolated event that we're very focused on, but it all feeds into like a larger situation that is constantly evolving book over book. So there's just a lot of things that the authors do right with this series that just make it so entertaining. I would say initially the weakest part of this series is the characters, but even they begin to grow on you. Now that I've read 5 books, I'm really just enjoying the ride, to be honest. Like, I always fly through each one. They're so explosive, they're so entertaining, and it's just like such a great series to have on deck, especially if you love sci-fi or if you're just wanting something that's intense and just an absolute page turner. I love the Expanse series. Next is a book that completely took me by surprise when I read it, and that is The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I love this author so much, and she has written many of my favorite books, but for some reason when I picked this book up, I was not expecting to be as obsessed with it as I am, but looking back, it does make sense. It's like Silvia Moreno Garcia's like Jane Austen-esque story. It's a fantasy romance tale with so much melodrama and angst. I just love it so much. In the story, we follow our main character, Nina, and Nina is about to debut into society, and she dreams of becoming part of a group of women called the Beautiful Ones. But Nina herself is kind of struggling. She, one, has telekinetic abilities, which kind of leaves her kind of clumsy in certain like social situations, because when she's nervous, she has a harder time controlling her power. At the beginning of this book, though, she runs into a mysterious man named Hector, who's actually like travels the world showcasing his telekinetic powers, and she basically really wants to become his apprentice. He readily agrees, and that is because Hector himself has a secret, and that is he is in love with Nina's like cousin's wife, and he's kind of doing anything he can to get close to her once again. But the story just absolutely spirals out of control from there. I mean, the drama, the intensity, the emotional yearning, just all of the back and forth just makes this book absolutely delicious. The propriety, the parties people have to go to, I ate this up. The dialogue, and at the heart of the story, we have Nina, who is such a likable main character to root everything that is going on. If you love like very romantic, very over the top kind of historical setting books, this is the story for you. Seriously, if you love Jane Austen, this is a must read. I was delighted by this. It was just stunning and so entertaining, and like the dash of fantasy worked so well. Alrighty, the next book I have to recommend is the Broken Earth Trilogy, the first one being the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. Again, just another one of my favorite fantasy series of all time. I felt that it was necessary to mention. The 5th season is truly just one of the most unique fantasy books I've ever encountered in my entire life. It stood the test of time for many, many years. This is also a book I feel like I constantly recommend to non-fantasy readers, particularly readers who like to read like Man Booker, prize nominees, or just literary fiction in general, because I feel like from a fantasy point of view, this is very literary leaning. Just the concepts and the writing style and what N.K. Jemisin does within this series is just exceptional on so many levels. But the Broken Earth Trilogy is set in a world that is constantly ending due to catastrophe, particularly catastrophe surrounding the Earth, from volcanic eruptions to tsunamis. The Earth is constantly destroying humanity over and over again. Obviously, this has led society to evolve in a specific way where communities are very small and insular, and everyone has very specific jobs, and everything is sort of recorded because they're always anticipating like the end of the world, if that makes sense. There's also magic in this world where some people can actually control the power of the earth, but instead of being lauded as possible heroes, they're demonized as like villains and heavily controlled. In the first book in the series, we follow 3 characters: a mother who is trying to find her lost daughter, a young girl who has just discovered that she has powers herself, and then a young woman who's kind of gone through the ranks and the schooling to utilize her powers, who is also working for the government within a posting. It's so unbelievably intense and unique, and also N.K. Jemisin touches on topics like motherhood, sexuality, race, all within a fantasy setting, and it works so well. And the last book I have to recommend is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. Another book that I was just so startled by how intense it was, and it worked so well. I also need to continue on personally with the series, and that is a goal I have for this year, but I did read the first book and it was just one of the best books I've ever read, to be honest. My Brilliant Friend is set in Naples in the 1950s. The entire series itself basically follows 2 best friends throughout different chapters of their lives. The first one basically documents their meeting, their childhood, and kind of their high school years, and the name of My Brilliant Friend kind of has a double meaning because the 2 girls, Elena and Lila, are both, to be honest, geniuses. They're both brilliant, but they also have like different life paths where one girl is able to continue her schooling where one is not, and kind of has to focus on marriage. The setting of Naples is very pronounced within this book. This particular series and this story is said to really capture a time and place, the violence, the sexism that surrounds these girls in their everyday life, and how it deeply impacts them being able to move through the world is very, very present. Also, the intensity and how the author was able to capture this female friendship is just fascinating. It's not one that is always perfect, but these 2 girls understand each other on such a deep level, but at the same time, they're also jealous, and at times they dislike each other, but they're always drawn back into each other's lives. They challenge each other like no one else does that surrounds them. And it's just such a dynamic and interesting friendship to just read and consume. I loved My Brilliant Friend. Again, I need to read the sequel as it kind of, again, documents the next chapter of their life as they begin to get a bit older. But if you haven't checked out the Neapolitan novels by Elena Ferrante, you really should give it a try. It also is a television series on HBO, which I personally need to watch. But in the meantime, I need to finish the series. And if you haven't yet, you should really consider starting the series because it is so good. Alrighty guys, those are 7 of my all-time favorite books. Please let me know down below some books that have really stood the test of time with you, as I would love to know. And I will see you soon with another video soon. Goodbye.